You wake up every morning, go to work, follow the rules, pay your bills, smile politely at people you don't particularly like, and suppress the urge to tell your boss exactly what you think. You do all of this because society expects it. But have you ever wondered what this constant self-control is doing to your mind? What if I told you that the very civilization we built to make us happy is actually the source of our deepest unhappiness? Sigmund Freud believed that every single one of us is trapped in an impossible bargain. One where we trade our natural desires for the promise of security, only to end up anxious, guilty, and perpetually dissatisfied. We're going to explore why Freud thought happiness might be nothing more than a beautiful illusion, and why the jokes we tell might be the only honest thing about us. Freud published Civilization and Its Discontents in 1930, during a time when Europe was still recovering from World War I and heading toward another catastrophe. He looked around at the modern world, with all its progress and achievement, and asked a disturbing question. Why, despite all our advancement, are people still so miserable? His answer was radical. Civilization itself, the very thing we built to protect ourselves and create order, is the source of our unhappiness. We like to think that society exists to make our lives better, but Freud argued the opposite. Society exists to control us, to suppress the wild, instinctual parts of ourselves that would tear everything apart if left unchecked. At the core of Freud's argument is a simple but troubling idea. Humans are born with two fundamental drives, what he called Eros and Thanatos. Eros is the life instinct, the drive for pleasure, connection, and yes, sex. Thanatos is the death instinct, the drive for aggression, destruction, and dominance. These aren't just occasional urges. They're the engines of human behavior, constantly pushing us toward gratification. A baby screams when it's hungry because it wants satisfaction now, not later. A toddler hits another child because aggression feels good in the moment. We're born selfish, impulsive, and completely focused on our own pleasure. But then civilization steps in and says no. From the moment we're born, society begins the process of taming us. Parents teach us to share, schools teach us to sit still and obey, religions teach us to feel guilty for our desires, and laws threaten punishment if we act on our impulses. All of this is necessary, Freud admitted, because without it, we'd have chaos. Imagine a world where everyone acted on every sexual urge, every violent thought, every selfish impulse. It would be unlivable. So we make a deal. We agree to repress our instincts, to bottle them up and pretend they don't exist, in exchange for safety, order, and the possibility of living together without constant violence. But here's the problem Freud identified. Repression doesn't make those instincts go away. When you push down a desire, when you tell yourself you can't have something you desperately want, that energy doesn't just vanish. It has to go somewhere. Freud believed it gets redirected, transformed, and twisted into something else. Sometimes it becomes neurosis, anxiety that gnaws at you for no clear reason. Sometimes it becomes guilt, a constant feeling that you've done something wrong, even when you haven't. Sometimes it becomes depression, a sense that life has lost its meaning because you're cut off from what truly drives you. And sometimes, interestingly enough, it becomes humor. But we'll come back to that. The point is that civilization demands we sacrifice our deepest selves, and the cost of that sacrifice is our mental health. Can you really call yourself happy when you're constantly fighting against your own nature? Carl Jung, Freud's former student who later broke away from him, had a different take on this. Jung believed that repression wasn't inevitable, that we could integrate our darker impulses into a healthy psyche through what he called individuation. He thought Freud was too pessimistic, too focused on conflict, and not enough on growth. But even Jung acknowledged that modern society creates a split between who we really are and who we pretend to be. He called it the persona, the mask we wear to fit into society. The difference is that Jung thought we could remove the mask in private, that we could find wholeness by accepting all parts of ourselves. Freud didn't believe in that kind of resolution. For him, the conflict was permanent, and the mask never really comes off. Who do you think was right? Freud took his argument further by examining what he called the superego. This is the part of your mind that internalizes all of society's rules, all the thou shalt nots that you've been taught since childhood. Your superego is like a harsh internal judge, constantly monitoring your thoughts and feelings and punishing you with guilt whenever you step out of line. It doesn't even matter if you actually do anything wrong. Just thinking about something forbidden is enough to trigger guilt. You might have a flash of anger toward someone you love, a sexual thought about someone inappropriate, or a fantasy about doing something selfish, and immediately your superego cracks the whip. This is why Freud said we're never truly free. Even when we're alone, even in our own minds, civilization is still watching us through the superego. We've internalized our own prison guard. This internal conflict creates what Freud called neurosis, a state of psychological distress that comes from the gap between what we want and what we're allowed to have. In Freud's view, everyone in civilization is neurotic to some degree because everyone has to repress their instincts. You can't escape it. The businessman who works 80 hours a week to prove his worth, the religious person who flagellates themselves with guilt over minor sins, the artist who channels forbidden desires into socially acceptable creativity. They're all managing the same fundamental tension. Some people manage it better than others, but nobody gets out clean. The price of admission to civilization is a piece of your sanity. What are you willing to give up? Now here's where things get interesting, and where Freud's book on jokes comes into play. If repression creates all this psychological pressure, all this tension that has nowhere to go, how do we survive? How do we function in society without completely falling apart? Freud's answer was that we find release valves, ways to let off steam without actually breaking the rules. One of the most important release valves is humor. In jokes and their relation to the unconscious, Freud argued that jokes allow us to express forbidden thoughts and feelings in a socially acceptable way. When you laugh at a dirty joke, you're briefly releasing sexual energy that you normally have to repress. When you laugh at a joke that mocks authority, you're expressing aggression that you'd be punished for if you expressed it directly. Humor is a loophole in civilization's control system. Freud analyzed jokes with the same intensity he analyzed dreams. He noticed that many jokes follow a similar structure. They set up an expectation and then suddenly violate it in a way that creates pleasure. A pun works by taking a word that's supposed to mean one thing and twisting it to mean something else. A dirty joke works by introducing sexual content in a context where it's technically inappropriate, but protected by the frame of humor. An aggressive joke works by letting you express hostility towards someone while maintaining plausible deniability. You were just joking after all. The moment of laughter, Freud believed, is the moment when repressed psychic energy gets released. It's a tiny rebellion against the superego, a brief vacation from civilization's demands. Without humor, we'd be even more miserable than we already are. Philosopher Henri Bergson had a different theory about why we laugh. He argued that we laugh at rigidity, at people who behave mechanically rather than adapting to life's flow. When someone slips on a banana peel, it's funny because they've temporarily become like a machine, unable to adjust to changing circumstances. But Freud would say that Bergson's theory misses the deeper psychological function of humor. Yes, we might laugh at physical comedy, but the really cathartic laughter comes when a joke lets us say something we're not supposed to say. The raunchier the joke, the more politically incorrect, the more offensive to authority, the more pleasure we get from it, because the repression being violated is stronger. Isn't it interesting that the things we're not supposed to talk about are exactly the things that make the best jokes? But here's the tragic part of Freud's vision. Even these release valves don't actually solve the problem. Telling a dirty joke might give you a moment of pleasure, but it doesn't eliminate your sexual frustration. Making fun of your boss might feel good, but it doesn't change the power structure that makes you feel small. Civilization allows just enough release to keep you functional, but never enough to make you truly free. It's like being given a small window in a prison cell. Sure, you can look outside and breathe fresh air for a moment, but you're still locked in. Freud believed this was the human condition, and there was no way out. We're stuck in a system that makes us sick, but we can't abandon the system without making things worse. Is this why so many people feel like something is fundamentally wrong, even when their lives seem fine on the surface? Wilhelm Reich, another psychoanalyst who broke with Freud, thought there was a way out. Reich believed that sexual repression was the root of neurosis, and that if we could create a society where people were sexually free, we could eliminate much of our psychological suffering. He advocated for sexual liberation, for overthrowing the repressive structures of civilization and allowing people to follow their natural instincts. Freud would have considered this naive. He didn't think you could just remove repression without society collapsing into violence and chaos. The instincts we repress aren't just about sex. They're also about aggression, about dominance, about the desire to hurt and control others. If you unleash Eros, you also unleash Thanatos. And Thanatos is terrifying. Freud's view of human nature was profoundly dark. He believed that beneath the veneer of civilization were still animals, still driven by primitive urges that have nothing to do with reason or morality. World War I had shown him what humans were capable of when the restraints came off. Millions of people slaughtered each other with industrial efficiency, and they did it enthusiastically. Soldiers who were supposed to be civilized Europeans bayoneted each other in trenches, used poison gas, committed atrocities that would have been unimaginable a generation earlier. And they did it all in the name of patriotism, duty, and honor. Freud saw through the justifications. The war, he believed, was Thanatos expressing itself on a massive scale. Civilization hadn't eliminated our aggressive instincts. It had just channeled them into organized violence. What does that say about our prospects for happiness? In Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud made a disturbing prediction. As civilization becomes more complex, as it demands more and more repression from us, our unhappiness will increase. Modern life might give us comfort and security, but it also requires us to suppress more of ourselves than ever before. We can't fight our enemies face to face anymore. We have to smile and compete in bureaucratic systems. We can't express our sexuality freely. We have to navigate complex social rules about consent and appropriateness. We can't pursue our own interests exclusively. We have to pretend to care about the common good. Every advance in civilization is also an advance in repression, and therefore an advance in neurosis. By this logic, the more civilized we become, the more mentally ill we'll be. Does that sound familiar? Erich Fromm, a psychoanalyst who came after Freud, expanded on this idea in his own work. Fromm argued that modern capitalism creates specific forms of mental illness by alienating us from our true selves. When you work at a job you hate to buy things you don't need to impress people you don't like, you're not just repressing your instincts, you're living a fundamentally false life. Fromm thought that much of what we call normalcy is actually a form of socially accepted insanity. The person who fits perfectly into a sick society is not healthy. They're just successfully adapted to sickness. Freud might have agreed with this, but he would have added that there's no alternative. You can criticize civilization all you want, but you can't escape it. The choice is between neurotic adaptation and psychotic isolation. Neither option leads to happiness. So where does that leave us? If Freud is right, if civilization necessarily creates unhappiness, then what are we supposed to do? Just accept our misery? Freud's answer was essentially yes, but with nuance. He didn't think we should abandon civilization or stop trying to improve it. He just thought we should be realistic about what's possible. Happiness, in the sense of complete satisfaction and freedom from suffering, is an illusion. Life is hard, desire is endless, and death is inevitable. The best we can do is find ways to manage our unhappiness, to channel our repressed energies into productive, or at least harmless outlets. Work, art, science, humor, love. These things won't make you happy in any permanent sense, but they can make life bearable. They can give you moments of meaning in an otherwise meaningless existence. Maybe that's enough. But there's another possibility that Freud gestured toward but never fully developed. Maybe the problem isn't civilization itself, but the particular form of civilization we've created. Different cultures repress different things to different degrees. Some societies are more sexually open, some are more communal, Some allow more emotional expression. If our current civilization is making us sick, maybe we could build a different one that asks for less repression and offers more genuine satisfaction. This is a hopeful thought, but Freud would probably be skeptical. He believed that certain repressions are universal, that any functioning society has to control sex and aggression to some degree. You can adjust the settings, but you can't eliminate the fundamental conflict. Still, isn't it worth trying to find a better balance? The question Freud leaves us with is uncomfortable. Are we willing to face the truth about ourselves and our society, even if that truth is dark? Are we willing to admit that the life we're living might be fundamentally at odds with our nature? Or would we rather maintain comfortable illusions, tell ourselves that happiness is just around the corner if we work harder, buy more things, follow more rules? Freud thought that self-deception was tempting, but ultimately self-destructive. The neurotic person is someone who can't face reality, who builds elaborate defenses against truth. The healthier approach is to look at life clear-eyed, acknowledge the tragedy, and find whatever small pleasures and meanings you can. It's not an inspiring message, but Freud didn't think psychology was supposed to be inspiring. It was supposed to be true. And what about humor? What about those moments when we laugh at a joke that says exactly what we're not supposed to say? Maybe that's the most honest we ever are. When you laugh at something inappropriate, something that violates social norms, you're admitting for a brief second that you have thoughts and feelings that don't fit the civilized version of yourself. You're acknowledging the gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. Freud would say that's why humor feels so good. It's one of the few times we get to be real. The rest of the time, we're performing, repressing, pretending. But in the moment of laughter, the mask slips, and something true comes out. That's why the best comedians are often the ones who say the things everyone thinks but nobody admits. They're giving voice to our collective repression. Freud's vision of human life is bleak. There's no getting around it. We're trapped in bodies that demand satisfaction we can't have, living in societies that require us to be something we're not, tormented by superegos that punish us for thoughts we can't control. Happiness, in any complete sense, is impossible. But maybe Freud was wrong about one thing. Maybe acknowledging this tragedy, facing it directly, is itself a kind of liberation. When you stop expecting life to make you happy, when you stop believing that the next achievement or relationship or purchase will finally fill the void, you can start appreciating the small, imperfect, temporary pleasures that are actually available. A good joke, a moment of connection, a piece of work well done. These things won't save you, but they might make the impossible bargain of civilization a little more bearable. And in the end, that might be all we get. If you enjoyed exploring Freud's dark vision of civilization and happiness, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you think Freud was right that happiness is impossible? Or do you believe there's a way to reconcile our instincts with civilization's demands? I'd love to hear your perspective. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future explorations of psychology's most challenging ideas. Thank you for watching.